right out of the gate, one thing I noticed reading was the titles of the chapters. I looked at the table of contents as I do when I'm cracking open any book, and I want to zoom out and I want a good overview of, okay, what's the narrative here I'm about to step into? And I just loved the names of your chapters. What human being acts this way is chapter 1.
Hi, friends. Welcome to the Sales Enablement Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Paul. That is Ralph Barsi. Ralph is the Vice President of Global Inside Sales at Tray.io and a friend of the show. And I'm always excited when Ralph comes on the podcast, and perhaps no more so than in this episode, because today we flip the script. Meaning that Ralph grabs hold of the microphone and asks me the tough questions. And in this case, he asked me questions about my new book. New book is titled Sell Without Selling Out, A Guide to Success on Your Own Terms. And the book is being officially released today, February 22nd, the day that many of you are listening to this episode. So if you want a true seller's perspective on my book and the value that you'll receive from it as a seller or as a sales leader, then stay tuned. All right, let's jump into it. Ralph Barsi, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Andy. How are you?
I am fine. How are you?
I'm doing very well.
Actually. I'm excited.
Me too. I always get excited talking to you.
Yeah, well, there's that. Absolutely. And I got this new book coming out. I'm excited about that. This is we're getting some great response. We were like #1 new release on Amazon earlier this week. Yeah, those things come and go quickly because they update but for a moment in time, we were #1 new release on Amazon in our categories, which is great. So,
well, congratulations. That's an exciting milestone. And I don't know, I'll be the first to say it. I don't think you're going to be #1 for just a small pocket of time. I think it'll only appreciate over time. So I'm not surprised to hear that.
Yeah, you've had the pleasure of, I said that, the pleasure of reading the book.
Yep.
I'm saying that for you. Sorry. But yeah, no, I'm excited. I think that, sort of a message whose time has come. So, yeah.
Well, let's talk about it.
Sure. Well, you read it. What'd you think?
I did read it. I've got a ton of questions, insights. I don't know. I mean, we could flip the script and I can interview you about it, or I could share some of the takeaways that I had, or a little bit of both.
Let's do a little bit of both. If you have questions, I'm here to answer them.
Well, first things first, and not because I'm talking with you now, but I really enjoyed it because I felt its purpose and maybe its theme really resonated, and that is that it kind of disrupts what a lot of us have been taught or have experienced in our sales careers about how to sell. And it just introduces a new, better way, frankly, of approaching prospects, listening to them, engaging them, helping them, getting a very, very clear understanding of what their story is and what it is that they're trying to accomplish, and becoming a partner of theirs. I think that's a much better way and healthy way to sell and build relationships anyway. So I'm grateful for it, and I think the book is a breath of fresh air. How about that?
Wow. Well, thank you. Thank you.
No, thank you.
Well, you nailed it, though. I mean, I think, as I talk about in the book, I arrived at this point, or have arrived in the past at this point of view about how to sell, as you so accurately described, versus sort of the traditional persuasion-based approach to selling that most of us are taught. And it came from the beginning just because it just didn't resonate with me. I personally couldn't have done that, whether it was personality-wise or whatever. And it sort of started me on this journey very early in my career of saying, well, there has to be a way, as I talk about in the book, is to make sales work for me as opposed to the other way around. Mm-hmm. And in the process, then work better for my buyers. And it's something that I'm sort of curious from your point of view is having this conversation a lot with companies and with executives and leaders recently is like, okay, so how much do you really know about your buyer's impression of what it is like to work with your salespeople? I mean, we get this indication all the time is our win rates and so on, but how much do you really know? And my experience has been is working with multiple companies, obviously as a consultant, working with dozens of companies, very few ever sort of think to go out and say, wow, we should try to capture and quantify what that experience is and what it means to us in terms of the decisions we make about who we hire and how we train them and enable them.
I've seen the same. I think a lot of companies, just starting with the onboarding process of account executives or sales development reps, the onboarding curriculum typically centers on the company's history, the iterations of the company's product offering, and rarely drills into problems that customers once had that we have since solved, where customers want to go from here. Really focusing on use cases, case studies, knowing them cold. Now, on the flip side, a lot of companies do a great job of this, but I think most are the former. Right. At least in my experience, most are the former. And I don't know. I think this is a new world where we can start switching things up a little bit. I had a question for you, though, before we go there. And that is, was this a culmination of, interviews you've had on your podcast, your years of selling, or was there just a specific catalyst event or epiphany that occurred where you said, you know what, damn it, I'm going to write a book. I'm going to put a stake in the ground and let people know how it should be done?
A little of all of the above. I mean, it's third book. So yeah, I mean, the books tend to build on each other. But I think, part of it was driven by the podcast and talking to so many different people, both on the podcast and outside the podcast, and coming to the conclusion that we're not getting any better at this. That with all the advantages we have of technology and the like that have come into the sales space, is that we're fundamentally not any better. And in fact, arguably worse in some dimensions. I mean, if we look at, I come out of a background prior to starting my consulting business years ago of selling really big systems, to enterprise primarily, 6, 7, 8, 9-figure deals. And I measured myself. The key metric I was looking at was, what's my win rate? And so what percentage of my qualified opportunities was I winning? And generally winning, about 2/3 of them. And then we look at and this was not unusual. I looked at the time, other, people I thought were being successful and not all selling exactly the same stuff, but generally they were winning more than they were losing, and of their qualified opportunities. And as I talked to so many people on the show, especially people from the SaaS world, where it's sort of generally accepted that, hey, our win rates between 20 and 25%, oftentimes, we're okay with that. I was talking to somebody yesterday, an interview, he was talking about a client he had that 17% average win rate across the company. They were good with that because they just kept feeding stuff into the top of the funnel. And at that point, I contend you're not really selling, you're just playing the odds, right? Because that a process produces a certain outcome rather than fix the process.
Yep.
But I asked the question of people, I said, so what's the value to you, if you're a sales leader, what's the value to you of a 1% increase in win rate? And no one's ever been able to answer that question.
Wow.
Partly because they never think about it, right? Because the emphasis tends to be is let's feed the top of the funnel.
Mm-hmm.
And my concern is that what we've done now is we've told some sellers who are even hitting their numbers with 20 to 25% win rates, is we're saying, well, you're good at what you do because you've hit your number. And I look at it and say, no, because your customers are saying that 3 out of 4 times I decided not to buy from you. And so if practice makes perfect, and let's say you're only winning, 1 of every 4 of your opportunities, what are you getting practice doing? Losing.
That's right.
And how can that, if you're a salesperson, how can you accept that? I couldn't have accepted that. I can't accept that. I don't know how people do. So I think that, to my argument, sort of circling back to the top of the question you had is, I was motivated by the fact that we're not getting better, and arguably we're getting worse. And we have all these advantages, and we're not using it to help us get better.
Well, I'm grateful that you invested the time to teach us and coach us on this. In fact, the book opens up dedicated to Vicky, a teacher.
Right, my wife.
And I love that. I think you're a great teacher, and I think it's a good premise, or preface rather. When you open the book and you see that, kind of sets the tone that you, the reader, are going to need to put on your learner's cap while you thumb through these pages and understand. And we'll talk about this, the 4 pillars, et cetera. Mm-hmm. But I really like the teaching approach that you took.
Yeah, well, I don't look at myself as a trainer. I'm not a trainer. It's not the business I've come up with. I don't. I do look at myself as a teacher. One of the roles that I wear. So I appreciate you bringing that up, and also my wife has been such a big influence because she's been a professor at NYU School of Medicine for a long time, and as well as an associate dean there. And I just remember, it was about 10, 11 years ago, we were at an end of year party for the graduating students. And, 4th year medical students getting ready to go to the residency, and they were there with their spouses, and they had asked various faculty members to get up and speak. And my wife is very dedicated to what she does. She's been teacher of the year. She's sort of like termed out for teacher of the year. They won't give it to her anymore. She's so passionate about it. But when they introduced her to speak, she got the standing ovation. And I'm like, wow, that's impact, right?
Yo, big time.
Impact is none of the other faculty did. She got it. And it's because she makes it personal, and she wants to see people do better. And that's what motivates me. That's why I'm sort of frustrated when I talk to people. It's like, how can we accept this?
Yeah.
We can do better.
Well, we need more people like her, that's for sure. Someone who approaches their profession or their craft as if it's a vocation. It's, maybe it's why she's here.
Yeah. Oh yeah. She could teach forever. If she was given the opportunity, she'll try to teach forever.
I love it. Well, there's a lot of ways we can go through the book, Andy. And, you stop me if you don't want me to go deep on certain things, or if I've missed points.
I love to be on the opposite side and answer questions.
But you've got 13, 14 chapters. Right out of the gate, one thing I noticed reading was the titles of the chapters. Just, I looked at the table of contents as I do when I'm cracking open any book, and I want to zoom out, and I want a good overview of, okay, what's the narrative here I'm about to step into? And I just loved the names of your chapters. What human being acts this way is chapter 1. I love it. You talked about, your first sales training class at Burroughs Corporation, which became Unisys, we all know.
Right.
But it was kind of a dark picture that you painted in chapter 1 to kind of set the tone for, the salespeople out there that are probably sitting in those training sessions thinking, do I have to sell out to sell? Can I not be me? Can I not be authentic? And that, I thought, resonated big time with me and right out of the gate in chapter 1.
Well, I had no idea what to expect going into sales, right? Nobody in my family had been in sales. Like I said, a grandfather was in auto sales, but I didn't ever really experience that at that time. I had no sort of concept of what selling cars was like, but yeah, it was a shock, a shock to the system, to say the least. And as I talk about in the book, is the guy that was in charge of the training class, after I'd been there for 2 weeks, thought I was particularly ill-suited for a career in sales because, I was considered too analytical and not salesy enough. And and you would think that would have changed, that perspective about what we need in our sellers would have changed over the years. But again, part of the motivation for writing the book was that it hasn't. You still see so many sales positions, the descriptions that are written and the type of people that they describe that they want, that it's like, why? I mean, first of all, have you ever asked your buyers what they need in your salespeople?
Right.
Most people are like, no. Why would we do that? It's like, well, but that's a perspective to have, is, are you hiring people that can help the buyer achieve what they want to achieve and they need to achieve, instead of just sort of defaulting to this sort of prototypical, stereotypical image of what a salesperson is? And again, one of those things that just really hasn't evolved very much. I mean, I still see to this day, and I periodically go online and go through job boards just to see what people are saying. And I mean, how many times I see the words hunter and closer still in job descriptions, sort of depressing, actually. Because what's a closer? I mean, I challenge people all the time. What's a closer?
Good for you.
I mean, so I don't know. You're probably like me. Is like, how many times have you been in the room when your buyer made their decision?
Probably zero.
Yeah. I mean, I mean, there's some sales, car sales, insurance sales, there's some where obviously you will be some transactional, but in general, B2B world is, you're not there when they make a decision. What's a closer?
Yeah. Well, I think you bring up a great point about, getting feedback from the buyers on how they want to be sold or how they want to partner with you. I love sales development, as you know, and like you, I'm that guy, I'm peeking over the fence at job descriptions on LinkedIn on how the sales development profession is being conveyed to the world through the job descriptions. And it's very cookie cutter. Yep. A lot of the same language and vernacular that has really been part of job descriptions for at least a decade. And
at least.
As you know, for the most part, these are professionals who are making the first impression with prospects. They're the ones, directly and indirectly branding for the company in the marketplace through their outreach efforts, through their initial phone calls, through video messages that they're doing. And you would think it would behoove sales development hiring managers to reach out to customers and ask, how would you like to be contacted? What's the first impression you prefer when you're hearing from a company for the first time? What would you like them to call out? How would you like them to come at you? But it's just not done. At least it's not done in mass.
Well, I think that what I've done in the past for clients I've consulted with is those that, not uniformly, those that were interested in pursuing this, is, we created almost like the equivalent of a net promoter score about our sellers. So on a 6-month basis, we would survey our buyers and come up with a quantitative measure, an index we called it at the time, that sort of summarize their impressions of their interactions with their buyers and with their sellers, excuse me. And we didn't take it down to the individual seller level in terms of, hey, here's feedback from the buyers about you per se. We didn't want to, make it about the individual seller because, it wasn't a blame thing. It's like, what's the impression? What's the perception? Are we being helpful? Well, we all know the accounts and so on. So it wasn't like the information completely blind, but then you at least have some information. If you're an enablement manager, a sales leader saying, well, I'm going to make a decision about sales training for 2022. Sure. On what basis?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're looking at numbers. We see these holes. This person seems to, based on listening to calls, we think this person's deficient in this area, so on. Great. That's useful. But if you talk to your buyers, are they getting from you what they need? And how does that play then into your training plans? And when I ask that question of most sales leaders, the response is crickets, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we haven't done that.
Mm-hmm.
So how we truly say, well, I'm committed to creating a sort of buyer-centric approach to selling and a buyer-centric culture, if we don't ever talk to our buyers about this process of which they're the equal partners in.
You know what's trending right now is product-led growth.
Yes.
PLG. A lot of companies, let's lead with the product, lead with the product. A lot of benefit to that. Let people
with the right product.
Take the car for a spin sooner than later.
Yep.
What's your take on that? Do you think that's less buyer-centric, more buyer-centric? Doesn't matter. What do you think?
Well, it's hard to say, look, product-led growth is going to be the same in all categories of products, right?
Fair, yeah.
Because you've got a range of products. So things that are more transactional, a lot of SaaS products, sure, why not? Because the value that the buyer needs from a seller just to take that first step is relatively small. But if you're saying, look, I'm trying to penetrate a big account, is product-led growth the way to do that? Sort of nibble at it and then go in. Well, yeah, they get to try and buy, and then we'll get engaged. Yeah, possibly.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also a big believer that if you're trying to set yourself up to sell to big accounts, then go sell to big accounts, right? Go develop the relationships, go develop the connections you need with the stakeholders to understand what their problems are and ask the questions and why, why sort of do a sort of incremental introduction into the account. If it's a target account, go sell to it. So I think it has its place. It's just, part of what I think it does is I think it feeds into this, feeds into a lack of comfort that a lot of people have with doing outreach. And, they think it's going to simplify that whole thing as, we'll just we're not going to need to do a bunch of outreach because we're just going to have people take the initiative, our buyers take the initiative on this. And I don't know, haven't we sort of been through this before with the freemium models?
We have.
Yeah. So it is a bit of a repackaging. I get it. I understand the motivations behind it. I think some motivations are less obvious than others. But yeah, it'll work for some. Sure.
Well, it brings us back to the book.
Yeah.
Chapter 2 and 3 are titled Stand Out or Sell Out and Selling to Humans, What Your Buyers Need from You. Pretty clear what we're talking about. And what I love about this as well, Andy, is, the first half of the book, you're speaking to the sellers, and then you pause halfway through the book and you actually title the chapter an intermission, where it's almost like there's an aside conversation that happens with the sales leaders. And I noted in reading the book that you don't really talk about the sales leaders as leaders. You label them as bosses. And I think that's a big one, especially those who are, teaching the selling out way of sales. So anyway, I liked that and I took note of it. But stand out or sell out. You kick off chapter 2 with pushy, self-interested, lazy, uninformed, clueless. Buyers often use these adjectives to describe salespeople. And then you offer a chart. Hey, take a look at this chart of individual sales mindsets and attributes and see which column most closely resembles where you are now. And then you list all the different characteristics. So it's great. It's a great right out of the gate self-assessment. How good am I at this? And what do I think describes me as a seller?
Yeah. And I think that the point I was trying to make is that as humans and as sellers, we're not all one thing or another, right? So if you envision, as I sort of starkly lay it out, between a selling out and selling in as ends of a spectrum, opposite ends of a spectrum, is just trying to self-assess where you are currently between the poles, because we're all a mix, right? Me, I'm sure I've got attributes that I need to get better at as well. We all do.
Same, for sure.
But I think the thing about sales that oftentimes, increasingly, let's say, is overlooked is it requires intentionality to do it well. You have to be intentional about self-assessing. You have to be pragmatic about it. You have to be intentional about every interaction you have with a buyer, about what's the value I'm going to provide to them in this interaction. It's going to help them move closer to making a decision. And when you can be more intentional, is your odds of success go up. Because you're being conscious and, again, intentional about helping the buyer. If you're just going to be cookie cutter, robotic, completely process driven, then yeah, you're not. And this is the opportunity for sellers, is to say, right, I'm dealing with another human being. I need to be cognizant of what they need from me, which means I need to be intentional about it.
We all have finely tuned BS meters too.
Yes, we do. Well, and I've referenced this in the book, is that Jonah Berger from Wharton wrote this book called The Catalyst about persuasion, and he cites in there research that shows that as human beings, we universally resist being persuaded. And yet there are dozens, if not hundreds, of sales books with the titles, along the lines of How to Master the Art of Persuasion.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't believe persuasion's an art. As I talk about in the book, I think it's a blunt hammer that salespeople resort to using when they're not effective at learning how to influence their buyers.
And you talk about that in chapter 6. In fact, it's titled Influence Rules, Persuasion Drools. And what I love is you say there's a reason Dale Carnegie didn't title his classic book, How to Win Friends and Persuade People.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, just look at the definitions of persuasion. Persuasion's about basically using force to get somebody. They talk about, prevailing upon someone, change someone's mind through the use of force, basically.
Yeah. Domination.
It's coercive. At heart, it's coercive. Where influence is about taking actions that have an impact or an effect upon the thinking and actions of others. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to have an impact or an effect on the thinking and actions of others. And so, as I frame in the book, okay, do you think your job as a seller is to go out and persuade somebody to buy your product? And if you do, then you're going to undertake, I think, one set of actions. But if you think your job is to go out and listen to your buyer, to understand what's truly most important to them, the most important thing to them, and then help them get it, then you're going to pursue a different path of actions, a different set of behaviors.
So that book, again, I took note of it as Jonah Berger's The Catalyst.
The Catalyst, yes.
Okay, noted. That's one that's got to go on my list. I haven't read that one yet.
It's an interesting book. He was on the show. We don't necessarily agree about everything, but smart guy, smart book. And because I think that he frames a lot of this idea, sort of, you narrow it down to selling is you're trying to get people to change their minds. And I think that's just the wrong perspective. I think from sales, we want to talk about helping people make up their minds.
Exactly.
So it's always about, I think if you look at the world through more of the persuasion lens, then you're saying, I'm trying to get somebody to change their mind. And I think if you look at it through the influence lens, you're saying, I'm trying to help people make up their minds.
I love that. Chapter 4 and 5. 4 is You're Not the Boss of Me. Seize control of how you sell. This was a good chapter because the theme is about taking control, starts with thinking for yourself. And you make a great point by saying bosses can order you to follow their suggestions, but if you do that and then don't hit your number, they could fire you.
Yeah, who gets fired? Not them, you.
Yeah, they don't care that you were acting on their orders. Right. You didn't hit the number. See you later. You talk about... I was going to say you start to talk about selling in, which means to sell from the inside out.
Right. Yeah, I can't begin to say how many times in my career, and you probably the same thing, is where you're dealing with your boss and they make a suggestion or want to direct you to do something. You just think about it and go, that's just nuts. and so as we come and grow in our career, we're going to have multiple influences. It's bosses, peers, customers. I learned so much from my customers about how to sell. Is as a seller, I make the point in the book is that no one cares as much about you and your success as you do.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to take responsibility for that. Mm-hmm. And even if it means pushing back from time to time and saying, no, I think there's a better way to do this. And I'm willing to be held accountable for my results doing it this way. And more sales leaders should step up to allow their people this autonomy. In fact, the science is pretty clear that when you give humans more agency over the choices they make, they're going to be more creative and productive and innovative in how they get the job done. And so instead of being fearful about the fact that you've got people who aren't conforming to the metrics you've laid out for all of your sellers, encourage it, right? Instead of saying, well, everybody needs to have 5X pipeline coverage. Yay, you've got Ralph. Ralph does great with 2X pipeline coverage. He's crushing it.
That's
right. Rather than freak out about the fact that Ralph doesn't have 5X, let Ralph go at 2X. That's fine. But I encounter so many managers these days. They're just fearful to say, no, this person's coloring outside the lines and it doesn't conform with the data set that we're tracking. So I'm not happy. It's like, so grow up. As a manager, your job is no different than a seller in many respects. If the seller's job is to listen to the buyers, to understand what's the most important thing to them, and then help them get that, as a sales manager, your job is, I believe, starts with listening to your salespeople, talk to your salespeople, understand what's the most important thing to them, and then help them get that. And if you do that, you're going to succeed.
Sounds like a pretty simple formula.
Yeah.
I mean, at face value, it's pretty straightforward.
And yet you hear all these managers say, well, I don't have time to coach.
Oh, totally.
Well, what the hell are you doing?
Yeah, right.
That's first on your list. That's the first priority. Yep. You have the same responsibility. If your managers are saying to you, no, I need this report, and you're saying, well, I don't have time to coach. I don't have time to develop my people. Then you have the obligation to push back because you're not going to be successful at what you do unless, and again, as a manager, no one cares about your success as much as you do. Do the right thing.
Well, that's what you're saying in this chapter. In fact, you say step one is taking control of the situation. And you were just talking about, being accountable, taking ownership, running your business within the business. Mm-hmm. And it applies to everybody. It applies to the individual contributors as well as the leaders.
Yes.
As we know, a lot of leaders, they literally see themselves at the top of the org chart versus the bottom. And if they're seeing themselves at the bottom of the org chart, they're serving up and into the organization through coaching people, through listening to their people, through removing obstacles from the paths that their people are on or want to be on. And it's not that tough to flip that switch in terms of your mindset and approach to, sell in even to your own people.
Absolutely. And again, I think people default to the easy. Yeah. And managing the metrics and the KPIs is easy, quote unquote, easy. Having to get involved with individuals, that's a little bit more messy, but that's the path to success.
On that note, chapter 5 is titled Death to Salesy. And this is where you introduce the 4 pillars. You basically kick off the chapter by saying step 2 is to refuse to act in ways that buyers automatically resist. Being salesy is a way of acting that universally makes buyers squirm. Salesy is selling out.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's, I like to frame it sort of a question. And I ask this in groups when I speak in public and to groups that we're training or teaching is, so what's the one question a buyer will never ask you? And this is in the book as well, buyer will never ask you, say, hey, Ralph, I really like your product, but I just think we can buy from you because you're just not salesy enough. Could you be more salesy? I mean,
I have yet to hear that question.
it never comes up. I mean, somebody raised their hand once when I was talking to them and said, well, a customer will never ask you to raise their prices. And I said, that's not true. I've had that happen many times, right? But no one's going to ask you to be more salesy. It has no value for you as a seller, has no value for the buyer. And yet this is, in the majority of the cases, this is how we're enabling and training our salespeople to act.
Yep.
And it really does emanate from this basic perspective that I just talked about a few minutes ago is, what is your job? We're enabling sellers to think that their job is to persuade people to buy their products instead of their job being is to listen, to really understand what's the most important thing to the buyer and then help them get that. And so the first perspective is selling is something I do to you. The second perspective is something we do with you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what selling is. Selling is a collaborative process that we undertake with our buyers. Outside of purely transactional, hey, give me your credit card.
Yeah.
In a B2B world, it's collaborative.
Absolutely. Even in many respects in the transactional cycle, it's collaborative.
It can be. Right, but there can be a scale, right? At some point but definitely for the most part, it's collaborative. So what are you collaborating on? Well, we're collaborating on helping the buyer achieve the thing that's most important to them. And it's a point I don't get into in real depth in the book, but it's one I keep emphasizing people is when you think about it, as my experience has been, and again, this is selling a range of products over the years, is that in every opportunity you're working on, there is one thing that's more important than all the others. And it's your job to find out what that is and who it's most important to. And if you know those things, you're setting yourself up for success. I remember early in my career, I was selling mini computer systems, fill a room full of equipment that had about, one, I think I calculated, had like 1/500,000th of the power of my iPhone.
But it took up the whole room.
But it took up the whole room, and today's dollars cost close to $1 million.
Yeah.
Data storage was $1,000 per megabyte. Think about that, $1,000 per megabyte. And I went through a very competitive deal with this large construction company in the East Bay area of San Francisco Bay Area, way out in Brentwood. Ralph, you know where Brentwood is?
I do.
And very competitive deal. We were selling computer systems to automate all their accounting, and the job cost accounting in particular is really important. And I went through so many levels of demonstration, in-depth demonstrations, detailed demonstration of all the packages. I think there's like 8 or 9 different modules, accounting modules we were selling. And we're going back and visiting and we won eventually. It was exhausting. We won. It was a big deal. And we're going back after 3 or 6 months after the implementation, and they're running just one module.
Wow.
And the billing module. And I go to the CEO, I said, what's going on here?
Yeah, what are you doing?
What are you doing? You killed me on this. He says, oh yeah, but billing is what's paying for this whole thing. And it's like, oh, suddenly this light bulb flops on. It's like, oh, all those other things were nice to have. This was the thing that was driving. And I was completely unaware. So for me, that was like a lesson to say, okay, there's a one thing. And I'd serve every opportunity I've worked subsequent to that. It's like, what's that one thing?
Mm-hmm.
And if you can find it out, well, then, you're on the road to success. But the path to learning that comes through your ability to connect with your stakeholders on a human level, to be able to earn the trust and the credibility so they give you permission to stick your nose in their business to the degree that you can learn this. There's this conception that somehow if you're a seller and you ask questions of your buyers, they're all going to answer them uniformly. And they don't. They don't share equally with everybody. It's based on what they think about you and their perception of you and their value that you're going to bring to you. They don't share the same. Just because you ask the question doesn't mean you get the answer.
Well, this is a great segue into the 4 pillars. Can we talk about them for a minute?
Sure. Yeah. So as I write about in the book, and my experience has been, and my strong belief is that your ability to succeed in a sales world is based on your ability to develop these 4 human skills. I call it connection, curiosity, understanding, and generosity. And I call it human skills because when we're talking about selling out and the salesy behaviors, those are all learned behaviors. No one comes out of the womb like that, right? But we're all wired to connect with other people. We're social animals. We're wired to want to use our curiosity because curiosity is how we navigate unfamiliar parts of the world around us. It's how we learn. We're wired to want to understand, use our curiosity to reach a point of understanding so we understand the world. So we have empathy that drives from the understanding with people that we deal with. We're wired to want to give because it makes us feel good to give. Mm-hmm. So those are sort of core human attributes that enable you to be able to connect, to build trust and credibility with the buyer, to be given permission to stick your nose in business and ask great questions, to keep asking till you get to the point where you truly understand what's most important to them. And when you have that understanding what's most important to them, it then informs how you give and give generously to help them achieve their goals. So those 4 pillars.
And you ask, how will you know you're on the right track when your buyer tells you you don't act like a salesperson?
Best compliment in the world you can get. I mean,
no
that's
question.
what I talk about in the book. When the customer told me, it was just like, oh yeah, okay, that's how you're supposed to be doing this. That's, as a seller, that's it. I mean, you're not hiding the fact you're in sales. I know a lot of people want to cloak it with their titles or so on, but there's no hiding. The buyer knows why you're there, but you have complete control over how they experience that with you. And that's what you want.
And that's where the intermission happens in the book, where you pause and you speak with the sales leaders. And it's almost like you offer them a juncture to, change things for the better at this point. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have to be this way. You can empower your sales team to sell differently and sell better and sell from a more human.
Right. Yeah, it's a choice you make as a manager. Do you want to be a leader that inspires people to a higher level of performance, or do you want to be just a boss that just sort of micromanages their daily existence? And there's a big difference between the two. And when we look at issues like high levels of churn among sales teams and burnout and depression and so on, it's, these things are all linked. We can create an environment where people want to work and want to do the best and are, as I said, given the autonomy and the agency to make that happen. Or you can just be a meat grinder and just grind them up and pump them out. And, too often these days, I think the sales world is a meat grinder.
It's sad. It really is.
Yeah.
And I really like how you say, if the leaders want their team to become the best sales version of themselves, they need to have the autonomy to experiment and fail on their own terms. So let them do their thing.
Yeah. And what's the worst that can happen?
Exactly.
I mean, don't get nervous about don't get nervous. Empower people instead. And if I had a conversation with somebody early in the sort of arc of this podcast, and this person had written a book about sales management, and we got into this sort of heated argument where her contention was that if you had somebody that was on your team as a seller and they're making their numbers, but they're doing it in a way that didn't conform to the process, she felt as a manager, your obligation, and she wrote about this in the book, your obligation was to fire that person.
Yeah.
Because they'd be too disruptive.
Yeah.
And I just have 180-degree difference. If they're not being disruptive, but all they're doing is succeeding on slightly different terms, you want to encourage that.
Yep.
It's not, how many salespeople in the United States? 5 million, roughly, something like that?
Sounds right.
Yeah. That means there are 5 million sales processes that exist. And you have to own up to it as a manager. There are 5 million because everybody's going to do it just slightly differently. And rather than trying to put people into a box, enable them, free them up. I have this quote, one of my favorite quotes I had in the book. talking about Clint Dempsey. If people are soccer fans, they know him. This show could be subtitled "The Soccer Show."
Yeah,
because we talk about it a lot. And Clint Dempsey was one of the great players in the United States history. And I've quoted in a book from his boss, Bruce Arena, or his manager, Bruce Arena, had managed him both on the men's national team, U.S. men's national team, as well as club team. And somebody said, well, why is Clint so successful? And Arena just said, because he tries shit.
Yeah.
And as sellers, that's what you have to do. You have to try shit. Just try something different. If what your path you're on isn't working, don't double down. Do something different. Try other things.
In the chapter on understanding, you quote Kurt Lewin.
Yes.
Saying if you want to truly understand something, try to change it.
Yeah. That's so important, right? Is two things. One, that works both for you as a seller, right? If you're trying to understand what you're doing as a seller, try to change it. Same applies to your buyers. If you're truly trying to understand what's most important to your buyer and help your buyer understand what's most important to them, try to change what they're doing. Mm-hmm. And yeah, change is the great catalyst.
I mean, they're clearly trying to change, or they're discerning whether or not to make a change, or else they wouldn't be evaluating your offering in the first place.
Right. They wouldn't be spending the time with you.
Right.
And so what I talk about through the selling in motion, through the 4 pillars, is, are you earning more time and attention from your buyers? And that's your goal on one level, is like, yeah, if I can't command the time and attention of my buyer, if I can't be credible enough, if I can't be trustworthy enough, if I can't demonstrate that I can provide value to them, then in a very intentional way, then yeah, I'm not going to get any more time and attention. Mm. And it gets withdrawn very quickly. So I talked about earlier in the book and this is something that doesn't get talked enough about. I talk about it a lot, but I don't hear other people talking about it, and it needs to be talked about more, is what's your buyer trying to accomplish, right? In this process, what are they trying to accomplish? Mm-hmm. What they're trying to accomplish is they're trying to quickly gather and make sense of the information they need to make a good decision with the least investment of their time and attention.
Right.
This is what your buyer is trying to do. These people, if you have a buying committee, they've all been dragged out of their primary jobs to come together to help evaluate and make a decision. They don't want to spend endless amount of time doing that. They want to do it efficiently with the least investment, again, of their time and attention. They're not trying to make the absolute best decision. They're trying to make a good enough decision. Well, help them do that.
At one point, you write 80% of buyers earn zero return invested in you. Yeah,
that's from either a Gartner or a Forrester study of CEOs. And I've since read another book by co-authors Stephen Timmy, I can't remember, and Melody Astley, called Insight-Led Selling: Adopt an Executive Mindset, Build Credibility, Communicate with Impact. And they did a lot of research with C-level people that basically substantiated the same thing. Mm-hmm. But actually, and they had an interesting fact in their study. You'd appreciate this. I forget what the data source was, but it's quoted in the book saying that some surveys that only 19% of sales managers in B2B space thought that their sellers could act as trusted advisors.
Wow.
Or considered trusted advisors. And I thought, wow, that sort of speaks to the problem right there, doesn't it?
Breaks my heart.
Who's responsible for that?
Right. They are.
The managers.
Yeah, exactly. They are. That's the organization. It reminds me of the Edwards Deming quote, every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets. And that is a great illustration.
Quotes. Right. I mean, it's like people just, we're doing these things because we can. And people don't ever think about, well, just because we can do something doesn't mean we should. And I think this is so true in sales today. Yeah, we can create these systems where at the end of the day, it generates a 20% win rate. But should we? Because the consequences of doing that, cost of doing that oftentimes is we're slashing and burning through a TAM that's going to become untouchable at some point because We've carpet bombed them with with emails and outreach, and we're exhausting them without even talking to them.
We're setting an example, whether we like it or not. And as you know, selling to the enterprise, for example, if you kind of blow those first impressions, you risk not getting back in there for years, if at all.
If at all. And this is actually, I touch on this in this book, but I taught more about that specifically in my second book, Amp Up Your Sales, which was, there's science about the power of perception. And there's a professor, I think she's at Syracuse, that's done a lot of work on this, is that we form a perception of someone within 250 milliseconds. The time it takes to blink an eye.
Yeah.
I'm looking at you, I formed a perception of you, right?
And I have no hair.
You have no hair, right? Must be smart.
Right.
All this intelligence, burn the hair off his head.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then the second thing that the science has found is that perceptions are very sticky. So even when you're confronted with evidence that contradicts the perception, people are loath to change their minds. Perfect example of this is, maybe you have a neighbor that was falsely accused of a crime. In your mind, that person's always a criminal, not to be trusted, right? Even though they were completely exonerated.
Yeah, that seed's been planted.
That seed's been planted. And even though you evidence that this person had nothing to do with it at all, in your mind, there's still that seed of doubt. And so, these first impressions we make are lasting. And so if we're not intentional about creating a good first impression, we could be out of the game for a long time until a new person came in.
And that actually means not thinking about yourself when making those first impressions. Think of others. Put a 10 on that person's forehead. Let them bring it down to a 2.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Right. I mean, it's just, again, it requires thought. I mean, selling, I believe, is about thinking. It's a thinking person's business. My experience has been is those who are most consistently successful. I'm not talking about some mythological top performers. I'm just talking people who are good at what they do year in, year out. They're thoughtful. They're thinking in advance. They're intentional about what they do. And that's so important at every step of the way.
Critical. And I've seen it time and time again with the A players I've worked with. They're employing critical thinking on one hand. They're employing creative thinking on the other. But at the end of the day, they're thinking through every single detail. It's the little things making the big things happen, the follow-up and follow-through, just being mindful of the selling and buying experience that they want the people they work with to have is just so important. And it just takes a minute of time to just stop, reflect, and think through what we're trying to do here. And I love that you asked that or posed the question, what is it that the buyer is trying to accomplish? Pretty simple question, but it's the gold mine. It unlocks the gold mine if you can get that answer.
Well, right. And it's always there. It's always there. It's a story I talked about before, the computer and the billing system, the customer and the billing system. I've got a number of stories like that, that when I had the seller that was working for me focus on finding out what that one thing was, it made all the difference. And you might say, well, that's kind of a small thing. It is small, but it's big, right? It's
huge.
I wrote something not that long ago on LinkedIn saying, I really don't think that, there's good sellers and bad sellers. I think, there are people that think and are thoughtful about things and those who don't. The differences are really small between what you might consider a good seller and a bad seller. And so everybody has this capability of making that transition. It's small things that make a difference. And that's true with customers making their decisions. The difference between winning and losing, I think you and I have talked about this before, is if I were to ask you, okay, well, what was your margin of victory on your last deal that you won? Like in sports. Well, we won by 14 points. Okay. How much did you win by? You have no way of knowing.
No.
You have no way of knowing. So you have to assume that I just need to be 1% better than the other person. That's to your point about paying attention to detail. Being thoughtful, being mindful about the impression you're creating and the experience the buyer is having. These aren't world-shattering things or skills you need to acquire. These are human skills we all have at heart.
And it goes back to that question you asked earlier of the sales leader. What would it mean to you and to the business if we were to improve that win rate, I think is what you were talking about, by 1%? How can you quantify what that 1% means to you? It takes some thought.
Sure, but it's not that hard. You know what on an average customer's lifetime value is, right? So
I'm not arguing.
No, I know you weren't arguing. My thing is just to encourage people to do it. Is everybody has this data.
Yeah,
you can figure it out pretty quickly. As an individual, you can figure it out quickly what it would mean for you. Mm-hmm. So it's thinking about the things that really move the needle for you.
Well, jumping to the conclusion of the book, you talk about not being a sales zombie. And I'm bringing this up because of what we're talking about right now.
Right.
You say in the book, I think Hollywood's continuing fascination with zombies comes from the fact that there are so many of them among us. They look the same, they sound the same, but they've been unplugged.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was just going to say the thing that made us want to look at them, listen to them, it's gone. They're still here, but they're just waiting to be embalmed. And I think, and I know you think the same applies to many salespeople.
Yeah. Yeah. They sort of retired in place, I think, to some degree. And it just, there's so few professions that reward growth the way ours does, and rewards an investment that you make in yourself the way that ours does. I know most careers do, but this is one that's such a performance-based profession. I think it's sort of the outsized rewards for the investments you make.
Yeah.
And yeah, why be a sales zombie? And that quote, first of all, is from one of my favorite series of books written by a guy named Timothy Hallinan, about a character called Junior Bender, who's I know you love books. He's a thief that basically other criminals hire to be a detective for them to solve their problems. Very entertaining, very, very funny. But yeah, it caught my eye. That quote when I first read the novel was a few years ago. I cut and pasted. It was like, yeah, just so descriptive of people we see in sales. They're sort of treading water, hoping things will get better, and you have to take charge of that. Mm-hmm. It doesn't happen on its own.
Right.
And the choice is really up to you. And if you can't make those changes in the position you're at, in the company you're at, then go find a better fit. I think the fit is not talked enough about. Is you want to find a place where you're a fit. You could have a bad experience in one organization. You don't succeed to the level that you want. Yeah, is it you or is it the organization or a combination of both? And so maybe, I just need to find a place that's a better fit. We've all seen stories of like professional athletes that on one team, it's just not happening. Like a highly rated draft choice in football, it's just not happening on one team. They get moved to another organization and suddenly they play up to their potential. Mm-hmm. Happens all the time. It's fit. Fit is really important. It's our environment. It affects how we think and how we act on a daily basis. So if you want to really take control of how you sell and take control of your own destiny, you got to be in a situation where there's a level of fit, and you have to look for that intentionally.
Yeah, and you'll know intuitively if it's a bad fit.
Yeah. I mean, I just remember one company I was at, we got acquired by another company, and the CEO, president of the acquiring company, just a bad person. Mm-hmm. Managed through yelling and screaming and intimidation and the thing that it was almost sort of like Stockholm syndrome, because the senior executives that had been in the acquiring company before they acquired us, they all liked this guy, and I was like,
why?
Really? I'd been in an executive staff meeting and seen him reduce one of you guys to tears.
Yeah,
And so that company was based on the East Coast. I was on the West Coast. And I was running, after we got acquired, I took over international sales for the combined entity and was running that. And I just decided that every month when I was supposed to be on the East Coast for executive staff meetings, that I would have a customer meeting in Europe or Asia. Because I enjoyed what I was doing, but I just didn't want anything to do with that guy. And eventually they came to me after about 7 months after the acquisition and said, if you want to stay at the company, you need to start coming to the meetings. And I said, okay, see ya.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
So, yeah. Well, yeah. Life's too short for that. Don't put yourself in those situations.
Well, the book's called Sell Without Selling Out. Talk to us about how we can get it into the hands of a lot of sales leaders and sales teams, because, I mean, we're partial, of course, Andy,
right.
But so many need it. So many need this book.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Contact me if you're interested in talking about how you can get the book into the hands of your sales team and the additional sort of benefits that can come with doing that, whether it's having me speak to your team or working with them. Contact me either on LinkedIn, direct message me on LinkedIn. I'm all over the place there, or at andy@andypaul.com. Come visit andypaul.com, learn more about the book as well. And of course you can pre-order it everywhere books are sold.
I love it. Well, I enjoyed reading it, and what I really enjoyed is it's one that I'll continue to reference and recommend. It's something that I'll crack open probably every quarter or every year, and return to a lot of the insights and takeaways that I got from that initial reading. So thanks for writing it, Andy, and thanks for giving me an opportunity to talk to you about it.
Oh, well, Ralph, thank you. It's sort of unexpected. It's not exactly what we had planned, but it worked out fine.
I loved it. I had a great time.
I did too, and I enjoy the opportunity to talk about it, because you can tell I'm passionate about it. This is something I'm so excited about, because it's the message for the moment, and it's just the path forward for all of us. So anyway, appreciate it.
Yeah, well, it's infectious, so I appreciate the passion.
All right, Ralph, we'll talk to you next time.
All right, Andy.
Okay, friends, that's it for this episode. First of all, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen. As always, I am so grateful for your support of this show. And I want to thank my guest, Ralph Barsi, for sharing his insights with us today. And also want to thank you again for investing your time with me today. Until next time, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone.